Welcome to another episode of Tailored Healing TV. I am your host, Taylor, and here we decode illusions and recalibrate reality. Today, I'm here to talk about one of my favorite subjects, one that implements the past, the present, and the future all at once, and that is the story of the Wizard of Oz. I've talked about this many times before. I've even taught a class on it, but I thought that it was pertinent to bring to the show today because what is happening within our reality is an illusion being lifted on how our systems are actually structurally run. And it's playing itself out through the mythology of this story. In the esoteric world, we live in a funhouse of mirrors where stories of the past are reflected back into the present. And we tend to play out this Broadway stage play as if it's happening in our actual reality. The Wizard of Oz is a story not only of monetary currency in our world's economic systems, but also the spiritual journey to home. The way that the entire United States and other world systems of bondage have been structured are to keep certain figures in positions of power, like the wizard. And so when we look at the political landscape versus what it means to actually be on the land and have equity, it makes you think that we are actually in a dreamscape. The dreamscape is this idea that the fantasy of the American dream is exactly what we should be reaching for when the dream is happening within. Talking about the Wizard of Oz, I always tend to lean more into the story of the Wiz because I feel like entertainment wise, it's actually true to the actual story. So when I hear a lot of people actually break down the story of the Wizard of Oz, they always reference the version with Judy Garland. But very few people I've heard break down the Wiz, which was the version that my parents introduced me to when I got a little bit older. I started off with the Judy Garland version. But as I got older, a couple years ago, I started really breaking down the concepts of the differences between the Wiz and the Wizard of Oz and why. So The Wiz is more true to the story because L. Frank Baum's book that was released in the 1900s features Dorothy with silver slippers, and this was to denote the Silver Age. Now, they have an excuse that as we switched into Technicolor film, ruby slippers looked better on screen, but if you know how to look for signs and symbolism, red is also a symbol of bloodshed and war, Mars energy, manipulation, and spell work. And so in The Wiz, Diana Ross, who is starring as Dorothy, she donned silver slippers. And I thought, that's very interesting because her name is Diana. And Diana is the goddess of the moon. It's also an epithet of the name Lucifer. Lucifer meaning the light bearer or the light bringer. So Dorothy wants to leave, in this version, her home in New York. And she is pushed by her aunt to sort of grow up and get realistic about life. And so as she is swept away from New York into Oz, I thought this was interesting because New York is the home of the world's financial centers. It's where our trade markets are. It is where essentially even our political powers are storing and harnessing their information and the ability to construct reality according to the ley lines of New York. Even in New York, you have the statue of Prometheus at Rockefeller Center. Prometheus was the one who gave fire to the humans after stealing the knowledge from the gods. And so when you do that, that's literally a lifting of the veil because you're transferring a certain set of data and information into the hands of people who can use it to ultimately free themselves. When Dorothy arrives in Oz, she comes across Miss One, and I thought it was interesting that they gave her the name Miss One because it makes me think of the ancient Egyptian goddess Maat, who is a goddess of order and balance. And so numbers is what this game is all about because numbers are sacred geometry, their expression of who we are and what we're here to do. And in its rawest form, it is how we move from one state of being to another. Even our DNA has numbers, even our vibration has numbers. It is how we are able to formulate the concepts of ideas into things that are tangible to understand. Even your early philosophers used the system of the abacus. And so measurement of light, of energy, of vibration is how these structures were built. Another interesting thing about the casting choice were the visual things that were going on in the entertainment industry at the time. For example, I already spoke about Diana Ross and her name attributing to the goddess of the moon. Then you had Michael Jackson playing the scarecrow, and he actually acted out this ritual in real time. It wasn't just the idea of him being stuck on a pole and heckled by crows. We're not even going to go back into the Jim Crow theory, which is something that is connected, but I don't think in its entirety that's what it's about. Michael Jackson fought for his career at the very end to own his masters. after being in a relationship with Sony Entertainment. And so this spoke volumes to me because even within the American workforce and labor force, the entertainment industry specifically has the ability to take someone with massive artistry and work them through a system where they can export their energy across multiple platforms for years, all while keeping it generating for a system that's not quite serving themselves. I believe towards the end of his career, especially with albums like Escape, he really denoted a lot of hidden esoteric concepts. Even if you've seen his Escape album, he's wearing a ring of Saturn around his head. When we enter into these systems, knowingly or unknowingly, we become like the scarecrow. Now, and I say they, but not relating towards a specific person, but when speaking about what our systems are, especially the concept of the straw man, they say, oh, it's just a hoax for people to think that they're a sovereign citizen, which, by the way, sovereign citizen is not a thing. You cannot be sovereign and a citizen, because to be sovereign means you stand independently from any system. If you are a citizen, you are of a civil body. And I want to make that point very, very clear, because there are people who pursue this process without that knowledge, and then they're kind of left in the dark because all they wanted to do was free themselves from a system whose structures have been in place for literally hundreds to thousands of years. And without that full understanding of it, your spiritual body or your animus that is craving its idea of freedom is going to rush towards the light, not understanding the light must first be interpreted within in order to see it without. So Michael Jackson sings this song called You Can't Win. And I think it's just because Black people, specifically entertainers, we have a way of transporting our souls through music, like griots, which you've probably seen in the movie Sinners, which was featured most recently. But the song he sings where he says, you can't win and you can't break even and you can't get out of the game, held so much power to it, because as he is singing with his arms out, he is the Christ resurrected figure. And if you're familiar with Michael Jackson, you know he always used to hold his arms out in performance. When he says that, there's a line also where he says, people keep saying things are going to change, but they look like they're staying the same. The crows heckle him, and then Dorothy is the one to convince him, like, you don't have to listen to what other people say. Even at the beginning scene where she meets him, he's quoting philosophers and authors. So he has the knowledge and information, but he's not able to move himself from being nailed to a cross, quite literally. So he gets down and he follows her down the yellow brick road. Now, the bricks road, we have to think about it. Let's break the concepts down. Diana is goddess of the moon. Moon is ruled by silver. They head down the yellow brick road and you see a vision of New York. So it's very possible she's in a dreamscape thinking she's still in New York, but she's actually in Oz. The yellow brick road, I would denote to BRICS currency right now, which, if you are not aware, is world powers joining together to collapse the paper dollar, the fiat, the greenery that is created by talismans, which that's what dollars are, because all the signs and symbols on them, everything from the pyramid on the back to the face of the no longer alive president that you're placing on the front, becomes a form of exchange as a debt note. And so they head up the yellow brick road because she is told by Miss One, remember the goddess of balance and order, that only the wizard can give her the power to return home. I also say perspective in this story, because if someone told me that only one person had the power to return me back to myself, I'd be looking like, you sure? But in a sense, the seeker, the fool on the journey, is who she is and who she becomes. So we have her get the scarecrow. He's part of the brain. Next step on the journey, they meet the Tin Man. Now, I had to think really hard about what I thought the Tin Man was and what he represented, because it was more than oil and lubrication. He was stuck in a carnival of some sorts, and he was stuck. He had no movement. He had no fluidity about him. They also say he was crushed by his wife, which I feel like is a denotation to the fullness of the pleroma, or the goddess Sophia, or even the seated woman of Catalhyuk. I think that's how you pronounce that, which is this divine feminine structure that is seated amongst men, amongst her servants and her subjects, and that he was crushed by her. It's funny when you think about it, because then you slide some oil to me, and it is a fun little song, but when he starts to cry and sings, what could I do? Or what would I do if I could feel? Feeling and fluidity and movement is what is stopping him. And I think this is important to remember spiritually because the Kundalini state, which is moving the cerebral spinal fluid and spiritual practices from the base of your spine to your crown chakra, is allowing that movement in your body. This is why they refer to it as a serpent. And so, as they give him oil, which to me is like a note towards snake oil, like you had snake oil salesman, he starts to move around. He's like, all right, let's go, let's get out of here. I just want to say a side note, I enjoy talking about this story so much because I prefer The Wiz over The Wizard of Oz. I love both stories, but there's just something about seeing your own culture tell these very esoteric stories in real time and you just connect with it. Like the music is good, the dancing is good. So then we get to the lion, what I like to refer to as the conquering lion of Judah. Now, I'm not going to get into too many political aspects of this because then we would have to break down Israel and that would take some time in order to do. But what I will say is facing the lion when it comes to courage. I think about the conquering lion and what that actually represents. And the lion's paw is also a part of Freemasonry. Now, he's too scared because he's never had to have courage, but he flaunts it around as though he has it. Mean Old Lion is a song that comes on when he comes in, and it's actually in a library, which makes me think of the Akashic Records. Also, where knowledge and memory is stored, it's a giant library. And so she has to instill, obviously, some courage in him to say, come on, let's get up and ask. Maybe the wizard can give you some. Maybe there's some greater power or force that can instill what is naturally already inside of you. I also speculate that these are concepts of the masculine that are trapped inside Dorothy, that she is trying to free her own inner divinity by looking at different aspects of the male, because I don't even think they talk about Dorothy having a father. She lives with her aunt and uncle in the show. So that direct line of the family structure is already torn apart, which would tell you why this is related to the American economy. Having a nuclear household was what held a family together. And the more it got separated by division, whether it be through workforce, relationships, societal influence, this would split the family. And the family is also happening within the mind or the brain because you have the masculine and feminine concepts that are guiding you. But your brain, though it feels like it's split, is one brain that harbors millions and billions of neurons that are constantly making your decisions. Imagine influencing an entire system economically by tearing apart the family, like you're tearing apart a cell or a nucleus. They need one another to survive. So I believe that the three figures that she takes with her to the land of the dead are the structures of the masculine, maybe even split into three, like Father, Son, Holy Spirit, which are also maiden, mother, and crone in an inverted sense. So they get to first the poppy field, which it's so funny because in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy just lays down in these bed of roses, but poppy is also a denotation towards opium, which influence particular communities very heavily. And when they fall into the poppy field, her and the lion particularly, I don't know why they chose the lion for this. Maybe it's because the lion represented willpower, but they are the ones to get affected by the poppy girls. That's what they call them. It's like a sex club. But imagine little Taylor watching this, like, not knowing what's going on. Anyway, as they head towards the Emerald City, it's very interesting if you see the sign of Oz, because Oz actually takes place at the World Trade Center. Can you believe that? I don't know if anybody took that in. I mean, I know that there are many people who live in New York, but maybe have not internalized that that story is happening in the very place where our world markets are taking place. The World Trade Center, the collapse of the Twin Towers, all happen in the same place that is the central point of the world's financial systems. And so you see everything from Quincy Jones to the director speaking out through like this massive TV and saying, today the color is red, the color is green. To me, this also is the flow of financial states as well as emotional states as well, because red usually represents security. Yellow usually represents willpower. Green, meaning go, also represents the fiat currency system, but also the fact that it's called the Emerald City. And emerald is the stone of May, the month, but also of the mother. And I thought that was funny because, he's just a big voice behind a screen. That's it. And so they're terrified when they see him when it's really just one big spectacle, played by Richard Pryor, by the way. And so they're told that they have to go kill the Wicked Witch of the West, I believe. I don't even know if that was her. Now, the way that they depict her is not green in there. They actually have her looking like the seated woman of Cattle Hugh. She's out on a giant toilet. Can you believe that? Played by Mabel King. And I'm sure you all are familiar with the songs like Don't Bring Me Any Bad, No Bad News, I believe. And then you see like the flying monkeys, which that's a whole nother topic because then that dips into like Mayan civilization and culture. Winged monkeys could be a symbol of the character you may be familiar with, Kukulkan, that they show on Wakanda Forever, which they attribute to Hermes in mythology very often, but he has winged feet. And so the flying monkeys, which even in the Wicked version of the show are what are directed by the Wicked Witch in order to like be her minions. The whole story is inverted. And so they flush her down the toilet. These allegories you cannot make up. They flush her down the toilet. Dorothy frees everybody who's working in the sweatshops, which I think is why it's also more realistic. But then again, you also have to take into account that the 1970s film, there's a large gap in time between industrialization, farmland, and how things are moving. So as she goes back, and they don't use the concept of melting either, I believe. They use fire, all chemical fire in The Wizard of Oz, but they flushed her down the toilet in another. So it's almost like fire versus water. And so then you have later on in the story, as she goes back, they go to see the wizard. Richard Pryor's in his bed. He's chilling. He didn't think they were going to come back, much less make it back. He just said, go kill her, see what happens. And it's almost as though they wanted her to kill an aspect of herself because Mabel King, to me, represented the Great Mother. This is why I refer to the seated woman of Catalhuyuk, or you may even think of the Venus of Willendorf. This all chemical but very strong woman, almost draconian type of figure who is running this world. But the world is inverted, remember? So the way that they're presenting it on the screen may be an inversion of the actual story. And so they feel and they see that he's just an illusion. None of his power was actually real. And so she comes in contact with Glinda, played by Lena Horne. Lena Horne is looking exactly like Yemaya, and there's actually this beautiful shot in the opening sequence where they show Yemaya with a rainbow around her and children. It looks like a mural that was in New York City. And I use Yemaya specifically because she is the goddess of currency, of the great waters in the sea, the currency system. And she tells her that she had the power to return herself home the entire time. The currency is the knowledge of our ancestors and the stories that repeat through generations through actions. Now, the way that I relate this to the monetary policy and the currency is that the number one struggle of people, especially in America, but in other places, is figuring out the systems of money, which are usually related to knowledge and information that is stored and gatekept from certain societies because this is how power is maintained. Even in our current day landscape, Trump, our president, our 47th president, remember, ruled by the element of silver, appointed Dr. Oz for his cabinet. Slight coincidence or stories playing out in real time? The yellow brick road being brick's currency. Diana or silver or the feminine moon goddess having the power to return herself back to her original state, which is that of the void or knowledge. And so we see the beautiful score of Diana Ross singing Home. Home is where the heart is. And I find it interesting because through my own spiritual journey, I actually learned the term Om, which is a mantra or a sound that is made, spelled O-M. And as you make the sound, there's an opening in the vagus nerve that goes down to the center of creation. When I think about that and I think about the combination of the world's currency systems, knowledge was spread by word of mouth at one point. Before it was put in books, before it was gatekept in universities, there were mystery schools. There were people who passed it down by word of mouth. And so in this understanding, this is how power was utilized and gained within families and structures. Dorothy in this story of America, I believe, is represented by the divine feminine. Because the political structures that have carried on from Roman and Justinian times, which are also pulling from ancient Greece, Sumeria, Babylon, they existed because the ability to manipulate and control the hierarchy of power based on the knowledge and information people had. But the knowledge that they were looking for actually comes from the cosmos. And so this is why I think the story relates to her entering into this wormhole, kind of like Alice in Wonderland. She's dropping down into this world where things are strange. She doesn't understand them, but they are very much a entity in its own, a world of its own, where she has to immerse herself And to understand what this is, you need the willpower, you need the structure of the heart to carry yourself. Because I can say, as someone who is involved in esoteric studies, to carry this weight of knowledge and still move through a heavily veiled society is extremely difficult. It's like, how do I tell people that our entire world is built on illusions and it's broken down through movies that have probably been inserted into the dream realm, and expect somebody to understand that in plain sight? Because the language of symbolism requires that you break down your own ego and your psyche about what you think the world actually is versus what it isn't. I believe also that a reason that these stories are told with symbolism, with numbers, with names, with particular locations, is to activate the part of the subconscious that stores the memory of these things happening. Because your biggest question may be, well, how did they know that what was going to happen in today's political landscape was going to happen in the 1970s or the 1930s when the original film came out, or the play, or even the release of Wicked last year during the time that Trump was taking on the presidency again, while we were going through a major political power shift between the possibility of Kamala Harris becoming president, which she would be the representation of the divine feminine on that particular landscape, or letting Trump reenact that same goal. Now, I'll cover this in another video, but I believe that his resurrection of himself has happened across many timelines before. There's even a book that you may be familiar with called The Adventures of Baron Trump, which people say is speculative, but I think it's pretty obvious that anybody with that much political power has a database of esoteric knowledge. I'll just leave it at that, that allows a person or a group of people to see beyond timelines. And the use of entertainment and media is something that can further harness this energy into becoming a possibility, and much less or much more a reality. The American dream and what that is, even the word America, La America, America, has that mare in it. That mare, to me, is related to the Merkaba, or the soul vehicle, that is traveling through the experience of living in a world that feels unfamiliar, that's actually happening in the mental. How we utilize our power and our energy is what returns us back home. The divine feminine being hidden from her own power is something that also keeps that. Because when I say divine feminine, I'm not speaking about the woman, I'm thinking about the subconscious mind, the dreamscape that speaks louder than words. Are we able to take the things that are happening in the great sea or the ocean where we all came from, the amniotic fluid that we are born into, being born into a very material reality, and then getting base metals like gold or silver and having the ability to transform them into something useful that then becomes the generator of currency throughout the world? And then for us to now be entering into the age of ether, which I spoke about on another episode with President Trump recently signing with OpenAI, Stargate, and SoftBank, we're now moving this flat plane back into the ether realm again, which is where in the cosmos figures like Yemaya, mother of the ruler of the seas or the waters, would come in. And I believe Lena Horne was a beautiful choice in order to exhibit that energy, because even as she has like all the little babies, they look like stars. And if you take away this flat material plane and you think about where we truly come from, when you can collapse like a certain form of reality that is secured by Saturnian principles and the material plane, you're able to see beyond that and move that into a landscape where you can make your dreams a reality. It's going to sound very like fluffy when I say it that way, because when we talk about dreams, we're given the Disney version of that. We're given the idealism of find your Prince Charming, fall in love, and hope it all works out. But we're talking about entire structures of land that belonged to people that had their own tribes and communities taken away through the acts of colonization, of maritime law, and decomposed it in order to build a new system. One of the book recommendations I do have for you too, if you're interested, is Manly P. Hall, The Secret Destiny of America, which will help you understand the Masonic structures that were built on top of this land, that were replicas of ancient indigenous culture, Mayan culture, that you have to remember, like we've lived through thousands of years of history in which societies, especially those who held strong political power, were organized according to knowledge, according to sacred text, according to bloodlines within families. So the idea of all this that I'm telling you is not to try to outrun the script, it's to understand it. And to read code is very intricate, because you're looking at a story, trying not to emotionally attach to it. And that's like the first thing that becomes a red flag, because in the trying, there is still this pull of resistance. You have to understand all these things have already happened and they are still happening. But your role in the story, you become the seeker. You become like Dorothy, the awakened one. That is who connected to God's source power. And that God's source power is the creation process. Understanding that in the fullness and the void of chaos, there was order created out of that. But even in the order, there's so much illusion beyond reality and the veil that you can keep someone hypnotized in their own story without realizing it. Your dreams are yours. You are the soul vehicle. You are here to move yourself through that wormhole, to collapse time, and to understand that Dorothy's journey from the fool to, I would say, either the high priestess or even the sage or the hermit is the journey that we all go through in life. And so we can always learn from this how to grow, how to expand, and how to see that reality can be what we make it if only we focus on ourselves and returning back to the home or the center. So I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. Be sure to subscribe to Tailored Healing TV for full access to all of the episodes that we have, as well as behind the scenes content. In the meantime, you can visit my website, tailoredhealingcollective.com, or visit us on any of our links like Discord or Patreon to be connected with a like-minded community, or find resources that help you make your way through the matrix. So until next time, this has been a Tailored Healing transmission.